Only a few years ago, waste collection in Tonga was in a bad state. The collection service did not always happen on schedule, so the public often neglected to pay their bills.
We also had the waste authority not functioning and government having to subsidize them about 100,000 per month for some time, and the services of the waste authority just ceased to operate.
Government services such as waste collection were costing Tonga's government millions of dollars every year, even though the services were meant to be self-sustaining through service fees.
What happened now is that the collection, even the collection of the fee, is still very much a problem. When people don't see that they're picking up their rubbish, they don't really pay off the fee for collection.
It was clear to government that comprehensive reforms of their public enterprises, which are more commonly referred to as state-owned enterprises or SOEs, was crucial. They realized that immediate action was needed to address the problem.
The ultimate goal, of course, is to provide a better quality of life all around. And to do that, the SOEs that perform a real public service, well, the cost of it, which is now being levied on the taxpayers and the consumers, it has to be reduced.
The government of Tonga currently owns 13 SOEs. Most of these have been operating for many years at a considerable cost to the economy. With just over 100,000 people, Tonga is a developing island country with fairly limited resources and infrastructure. It is the only monarchy in the Pacific with a hereditary king as its head of government. Many Tongans remain very traditional and show respect to their king and to his government representatives. Tonga's SOEs are a huge burden on public funds, taking government money away from other urgent areas of need such as health and education and even debt reduction. SOEs can also be a deterrent to the development of the private sector. SOEs often get preferred access to government contracts, and their debt and equity are all subsidized. When they make a loss due to poor performance, government funds come to the rescue. This situation gives SOEs an unfair advantage and discourages the growth of competition from the private sector.
But I would say to you that perhaps maybe the argument is that at the end of the day, they are being facilitated by public taxes. So, and then they're coming in to compete with the private businesses. As a view from the general businesses, I think they're more concerned about what's cheaper for them.
In the past, SOEs constrained the growth of the private sector and, by extension, the economy as a whole. Over the past decade, the real growth rate of Tonga's GDP averaged only 2.5%. Without economic growth, jobs could not be created, needed taxes could not be collected, and social discontent might increase. Something clearly had to be done. This dismal economic situation prompted Tonga's government to seek technical assistance to see what could help kickstart the economy. The call for help went to the Asian Development Bank, or ADB, as well as to other development partners.
It is a problem in Tonga, and to be able to move forward, you've got to get somebody who knows something to be able to lead the way and show the way.
With ADB's help, in 2001, Tonga began the first wave of a large-scale economic reform program. This resulted in the development of the Public Enterprise Act in 2002, designed to reform Tonga's SOEs and help stem the drain on government finances.
Receive a response from Steve.
ADB advisors worked closely with government to draw up the necessary strategies to review the performance of SOEs with an eye towards achieving government's broader social goals.
Bring the table on. Okay, here we are.
The whole idea, government believes that the private sector should be the driver of economic development. Of course, in the number of SOEs operating in the country, there were SOEs that were competing directly with the private sector. The whole idea then was to move these competing SOEs to the private sector through sales or through just terminating those services being provided by the government.
In 2007, government established the Ministry of Public Enterprises. This ministry became responsible for overseeing the country's SOEs, including the new reform process. This marked the beginning of the second wave of economic reforms under this program.
And then, of course, the other issue we wanted to do was to review the legislations, which we finished an amendment by 2010 of the 2002 Public Enterprises Act. And in that amendment, it was legislated that there should be no ministers in public enterprises.
This amended act also required SOEs to follow strict performance and evaluation guidelines. These requirements included a stricter corporate governance, removing politicians from boards and making directors more accountable. Reporting requirements, requiring SOEs to provide plans and forecasts and to be assessed against these. A requirement for the SOE to operate as profitably and efficiently as a comparable private company. A requirement for government to deal with SOEs on a commercial basis when directing them to undertake non-commercial activities. Public disclosure, requiring the publishing of financial results in the newspapers. Although they were not part of the Act, government also set two additional requirements for SOEs. A profit requirement, which required the SOE to earn a 10% return on investment, and the privatization or liquidation of some non-core SOEs.
While we've had problems with that shift changeover, we're still confident and still accept that the legislative framework and the reform that has been worked out by the consultants that have been provided and by the ADB has been worthwhile. And I think we can go from here onto a much more sounder basis.
Removing elected ministers from SOE boards became a thorny affair, with some ministers resisting the move. But because of the new legislation, they had no choice but to leave the SOE boards. ADB's economic support program provided additional incentives to government through the provision of budget support to assist with policy changes, including the restructuring of 10 SOE boards by October 2010. By early 2011, all SOE boards had been restructured, with ministers replaced by private sector directors. This move had helped prevent potential conflicts of interest that might occur due to the special political interests of some politicians.
But that's what the main reason we want to allow professional people with the skills and experiences to come and take these leaderships over here. And then the other issue, of course, we want to minimize political interferences or political kind of perspective or any kind of political favoritisms. You know, we don't want to show them in here.
Tonga Power was a unique situation as government purchased this utility from the former Crown Prince, who assumed the throne in 2008. The new king wanted to divest himself of his commercial holdings, and so the assets were sold to the government and a new SOE was formed. Under the new reform legislation, though, the utility was required to be run purely along commercial lines. This meant that not only would there be an independent board, but board directors would now be personally held accountable for the enterprise's performance.
More guidelines, the more pressure that's given. I don't see this pressure, just doing the right thing. I don't have a problem with that. But as for the public enterprise reform, it brings the directors to be more focused, do what they have to do. If they can't do it, out, get others in.
Tonga's new legislation set a target of a 10% return on equity for all SOEs. In its first full year of operation under the new legislation, Tonga Power achieved an 8% return on equity.
We had a 3.7 million net profit this year for the power. And that's a benchmark, and I've told management that is where we're going to be. From next year on, there's no going down. And if there's a going down, there must be an explanation.
The requirement for profits from a public utility has raised concern from some civil society groups and businesses.
And it comes back to the basic cost of living. So that if a utilities board, for instance, raises, or there is an expectation that they have to return to government a certain percentage, of course it's going to impact the consumers.
The Tonga Waste Authority Limited is also included in the reform process. The authority is responsible for collecting and disposing of waste in the country. Although no longer formally an SOE, the government continues to treat the Waste Authority as one in terms of its operations, performance, reporting and accountability requirements. While an SOE, the authority was kept afloat primarily by government bailouts. Its poor service delivery was an ongoing concern to the public, and its poor financial position was a constant drain on government resources.
It was not only for the service, or we are merely to provide service efficiently, but to also be profitable, be able to collect and be able to pay dividend to government. So I think that was probably the fundamental push for the reform, because this organization was depending entirely on subsidy and was not able to give back anything to government other than the service. But then the service was also declining as well.
Before the reform process, the Waste Authority was controlled by the politicians and civil servants on its board. These board members, as well as some in the public, did not believe that the authority should operate along commercial lines. They believed that the waste service was provided for the public's good and should be free. The reforms sought to change this perspective.
Waste Authority, human capital was a problem, and we have restructured the board 2 times. The board had restructured management about 3 or 4 times. In the space of 4 years, they have maybe 4 CEOs. And this CEO is doing quite well.
And if there is performance there, we will be efficient. If there is performance there, we will be profitable. So in terms of service, it's for the best interest of the community, because we will provide a very good service, and in return they will respond to us financially. They will pay the bills that we give them.
The reform process for state-owned enterprises in Tonga has been strengthened by strong support from the government. Tonga desperately needs sustained economic growth if it wants to achieve further development and provide employment for the nation's growing number of youth. The reform of SOEs is only one step towards that goal. Many challenges remain, though. A major one is the shortage of qualified people to implement the reforms.
That's something we need to consistently, all the time, build within our leadership level here and our CEO. So the challenges aren't just the people. And we are going through that with some of our other public enterprises. So these are just the challenges. Just the people component is something that we need to work on very, very hard.
There is also a need for further consultation between government, civil society, and the business community.
Because I think the political reform had actually created that environment for the public to get to know more and understanding that they do have a voice, to voice out some of those issues if they're not happy or if they feel that reform will not bring any good.
A more difficult challenge may still loom ahead. Tonga's SOEs must achieve a delicate balance between providing the public with efficient and affordable services, but still provide a fair return to government.
Things are moving, things are turning, things are getting done, and I think that's what they're there for, because they perform a public service at the same time bring revenue for government.
Achieving the right balance requires the right mechanisms. These must ensure that the cost of providing services to the community is viable for an SOE. And if it is not viable, such as providing electricity to remote islands, then government must step in to finance this political obligation. Despite many challenges, early indications of Tonga's reorganized SOEs have been encouraging. On average, SOEs are increasing their return on equity and reducing their losses. In fact, Tonga's SOEs have performed better than those in many other island countries. As well as achieving better financial returns for government, SOEs like the Waste Authority are now providing the public with better customer service too. For Tonga's economy, the way forward may still not be certain, but positive steps have now been made to improve the performance of state-owned enterprises. Other Pacific Island countries may also be able to learn valuable lessons from Tonga's SOE reform efforts.